want you to take a second to think about this font. Now this spoon, this city, that car, that bike, this stapler, this mug, that sign. And do you notice how every time I point my camera at something new, you take just a second to think about it a little bit more than you usually do, just because I told you to, just because I made you? This camera has power over your thoughts. Do you feel manipulated yet? Now, what if I took all of those mundanities and made a whole movie or three about every intricate design detail you've never thought about so that, oh, I can't. This guy already did it. But why do we care? Because in making what I'll call the cinema of design, Gary Hustwit reveals something fundamental about the design of all the mundane things around us. These are films about the way everything functions, about design's balancing act between creating with formula and creating with humanity, a duel of style versus function versus heart. And through this all, we can also see how much a design tells us about the person who made it, and perhaps even poses the questions. What is good design? And what are the ethics of designing anything? How much control do we have over our lives if everything around us is designed? If all that sounds confusing, that's because it is, but lucky for you, the design of this video is to make all of that make sense. And to do that, we've got 3 very interesting films to dive into. Let's talk about it. This is Helvetica, both the font and the film. The first of Hustwit's original design trilogy. Its subject matter is pretty simple to parse, begging the question, how do you make a film that literally just talks about Helvetica for 80 minutes? And why is it so damn interesting? Well, this brings us to the original conceit of this video, one that would change about halfway through watching this film. Helvetica, on the surface, represents our human fascination with a cinema not of design, but of the mundane. Cinema has a unique ability to, as I did in the intro, turn your attention to something you may have never given a second thought to. It can be strangely captivating to be forced to focus on one weirdly specific thing. And in the case of Helvetica, it's forcing you to focus on this singular font. Something many people never think too hard about, yet something that all of us have been impacted by in some way or another. Wouldn't you like to know more about this font that impacts so much of your daily existence? I would, and there are reportedly millions of people who watch this film agree, because we're also strangely compelled by the promise of understanding the intricacies of the mundane. Mundane meaning the practical, transitory, and ordinary. Commonplace. And I think transitory is an important word there. Something we experience in passing. Helvetica may not be an active participant in your life, but it is something that holds more weight than you know in your transitory existence. And the forced cinematic gaze reveals exactly how, as the camera transports it from the transitory to the eternal. Helvetica is a film that, as it goes on, asks you to consider the fundamental psychological impacts of design philosophy. In making a film about a font, you make a film about why the font has had the impact and legacy that it has had. Design is all about the subliminal. What subconscious response do you have to this design choice? It's manipulative in that sense. Helvetica is used to manipulate, as is all design. So the question then becomes, how exactly is this manipulating people? How do the mundane and transitory manipulate our everyday lives? As far as Helvetica is concerned, it depends who you ask and how it's used.
The image of Helvetica as the corporate typeface made it so-called the typeface of capitalism, which I would reject and say it's the typeface of socialism, because it is available all over and it's inviting dilettantes and amateurs and everybody to do typography.
By contrast,
what struck me was sort of 2 separate cultures of design. One was the corporate culture, and the corporate culture was the visual language of big corporations, and at that time they were persuasively Helvetica. and they looked alike. They looked a little fascistic to me.
The reason I bring up these two examples is because they're exemplary of the opposing philosophical and political principles that the very same design can accomplish. One font has managed to create very different impressions on two different people, and it's all about how that design has been and can be applied. To one person, its uniform cleanliness and effective corporate appeal makes it fascistic. This is a font that subliminally warms us up to corporations that use it. To the other person, the uniform cleanliness makes Helvetica an easy font to successfully use as an independent graphic designer who's just starting out and wants to make designs that are appealing. The formulaic friendliness of Helvetica, the ease with which you can effectively use it, must make it socialist, for it can fit every person's needs. Who's right? You could perhaps say that both are right. Ultimately, it depends on how this tool is used.
It's also funny because a lot of people connect Helvetica sometimes with the sort of dangers of globalization and standardization. I'm not afraid for that quality at all. Everybody can put their own twist on it. I think you can put as much nationality in the spacing of a typeface as in a typeface itself or something.
The argument thus becomes, maybe this design formula isn't this one-sided thing. Maybe there isn't a formula at all. You have this design tool in Helvetica that can be applied in a formulaic way, but the variables in that formula allow for a vast breadth of unique expression that allows one user to say something totally different than another. It can be fascistic, and socialist, and capitalist, and standardized, and unique. When you change the variables in this formula or algorithm, Helvetica can become someone's own unique form of expression, someone's own unique form of manipulation. In changing the spacing of the typeface, what subliminal difference can that create on one's mind? These musings about design, the way design ultimately manifests into formulas or tools that can accomplish some desired psychological effect, are what made me begin to shift what this video was going to be about. Originally, I was interested in cinema's ability to make us focus on the mundane. Now, I was interested in how the mundane and the transitory affect our everyday lives on a much more psychological level. And more specifically, I said just a moment ago in reference to Helvetica and the mundane, the camera transports it from the transitory to the eternal. But that's not quite right, is it? Because this shot only lasts for so long before it moves to the next one. This film only lasts for so long. This music cue, this line of dialogue, cinema itself is transitory. And this is where things get interesting. This is when you begin to realize that every aspect of this film's dialogue about design philosophy and the ethics and politics of using a design formula can be applied just as well to cinema. This is also when I realized that Hustwit himself, fascinated as he seems to be with design and formulas and algorithms, is probably employing his own form of design-oriented filmmaking right now. And I got a pretty strong feeling that I was about to watch the same film 2 more times. This is Objectified, just the film this time. Now, I said I expected this to be the same film as Helvetica when you break it down to its fundamental design. Was I right? Yes and no. Objectified opens in exactly the same way as Helvetica, a montage of factory footage in which an engineer crafts the film's title using the techniques we're about to discuss, eventually leading us into the film with some basic mood-setting music. From there, the film also progresses in much the same way. The difference, then, lies in the open variables of Hustwit's documentary design, allowing him to give Objectified its own twist. This manifests in how the film expands on Helvetica's explorations of design. Whereas Helvetica made me think about the potential applications of design, Objectified, in its deep examination of industrial design and the design of objects, helped expand my understanding of what good design even is.
Gutes Design sollte innovativ sein. Gutes Design ist ästhetisches Design. Gutes Design macht ein Produkt verständlich. Gutes Design ist ehrlich. Gutes Design ist unaufdringlich. Gutes Design ist konsequent bis ins letzte Detail. Last but not least, gutes Design ist so wenig Design wie möglich.
These principles hold true in many aspects of filmmaking. A good film should be innovative, aesthetic, understandable, honest, unobtrusive, consistent. Wouldn't film get a bit boring if there was no differentiation, no obtrusion, all consistency? Isn't that what shot Marvel Studios in the foot? Well, yes, though those films were and continue to be successful in their formulaic design. Granted, I don't think a formula without differentiation is entirely what Rams was vouching for here. Other designers clarify some important additions to what good design should be.
Iets individueel karakter kan geven aan iets wat toch geproduceerd wordt door een industrie. Dat vind ik er interessant aan, omdat ik in het vak design zit. Bijvoorbeeld bij de sofa die ik gedaan heb voor Vitra, waarin er op het allerlaatst nog knopen opgenaaid zitten, alsof ze er zomaar op zitten. Dan zou ik dan niet van zeggen dat is imperfectie, maar dat is toch zeg maar een oog van ambachtelijk detail ergens opzetten. Weet je, dan kan het product communiceren met een gebruiker.
Crafted details. I think that's a very important addition to this idea of good design, especially as it applies to film. But let's keep going. When is design too much?
結構自分の重要な転換期にあったんだけど、客観写生っていう言葉を高浜虚子っていう、俳句のマスターがいるんですけど、その心情が湧きすぎてる意図が見えた時にもう勘弁してくれという感じになると。ただ単純にそこにある現象をさらっと読むことによってなおさらその人が何を言いたかったかってことを。
Combining all of these philosophies, we begin to see clearer the way good design and good film are quite intertwined. When I think of the last quote, it makes me think about my love and fascination for slow cinema. Am I so enamored by the words and stories of Tsai Ming-Liang because of the simplicity and consistency of his design, dotted with crafted details that give each execution of his formula a unique, memorable, powerful feeling? Like Fukasawa referenced, I find myself drawn into the poet's world when I watch his films. And is this why the common blockbuster formula often becomes stale for people? Not enough crafted details. In other cases, are there too many? Is style over substance a filmic manifestation of obsessive sketch, where the design wasn't pared down enough? And is this why I found myself, at this point in his trilogy, so fascinated by Hustwit? His design is simple, it is clean, it describes what is there without making his sentiments overly visible, and I am drawn in by each and every moment, trying to see Hustwit's human voice beneath the design he has crafted for his films. And what is Hustwit's design? He begins with that same opening. In both Objectified and Helvetica, he uses standardized fonts. He maintains a consistent rhythm to editing together his interviews, using B-roll where needed and often to introduce a change in subject and/or location. He employs B-roll further to provide supplementary examples of the design techniques or trends being discussed. In all of this, Hustwit is following a tried and true formula. It is clear he has an understanding of the basic foundational principles that make a good, clean, effective documentary, and he changes the key variable of subject matter to provide distinction between his work. So what are his crafted details? His specific choice of font, of music, of rhythm, how his footage is shot, how his lighting setups are staged, where his interviews are filmed, often inside the designer's place of work or study, which I think is a key choice in his work. In summary, his design is simple, useful, understandable, honest, unobtrusive, consistent. His choices don't stick out, but they are felt in the organic flow of his films, and they afford space for the viewer to investigate further. Finally, these crafted details. These changes in spacing, these changes in practical application, all serve to change the subliminal effect that his film has on your mind, even if you never even realize it's happening. What is Hustwit's design? To make you just as interested in design as he is without you even noticing. And sure enough, it works. His manipulation of the viewer's perception pays off. That's why these films are so successful. Not only was there an audience waiting for films about design, but with each piece of marketing and each minute of the film, there is also a created audience. Maybe you're part of that audience. Maybe this video is causing that audience to expand, and maybe you were manipulated by my thumbnail or my title to become a part of my audience. At the end of the day, everything is designed, and design is about manipulation, about reducing you to a set of psychological facts and variables that can be controlled by the world around you. Do you feel small? Do you feel cold? Do you feel manipulated yet? Okay, we're not talking about Urbanized just yet, but I could see Hustwit's design philosophy evolving towards something that would continue to resonate throughout Urbanized within the final moments of Objectified. For the most part, I found Objectified to be a fairly cold film, even compared to Helvetica. It is in many ways more about exploring the fundamentals of good design than the human impact and debate around it. This led towards that harsher ending of part 2, when you begin to understand just how much your everyday life, your personal interests, your moment-by-moment decisions are being manipulated by the design of everything around you, and when you realize that even film is a product of these principles of design, it can all begin to feel a bit cold. Where do you find the humanity in all of this? Those crafted details? It's a question I began to sense Hustwit was grappling with too. So, at the very end of Objectified, he takes a moment to break the formula.
At the end of the day, when you're looking around the objects in your house and you're deciding what here really has value to me, they're going to be the things that have some meaning in your life.
In this moment of humanity, Hustwit reflects on the objects that have meaning in his life. He allows for the personal to seep on screen. For a moment, we see the poet, and there it is. There's the humanity. Urbanized is an extension of this ending, I think. It once again follows the same design Hustwit laid out in Objectified and Helvetica, this time applied to urban design. But more than ever before, Hustwit captures the humans being affected by the design, especially those who have been failed by the design. It's funny. You'd expect the film about urban design, about the design of the very streets we walk on and buildings we enter and the transportation infrastructure we use on a daily basis, to make us feel the most futile in our attempts to master our own destinies and break free from the manipulation all around us. But that's far from the case. Watching Urbanized, I felt reconnected to my humanity. It reclaims in the grand formula that dictates our lives the human piece of the equation. The unpredictable, the personal. Take the segment on Brasilia. Brasilia is what you call a planned city. Every piece of it was designed around modern urban design philosophies before a single street was built. And it was designed with the intent of it becoming Brazil's capital, which it did. With such a clear emphasis on planned design, what could go wrong? UNESCO World Heritage even calls it a singular artistic achievement, a prime creation of the human genius representing, on an urban scale, the living expression of the principles and ideals advanced by the modernist movement. But look at it in practice.
It looks fantastic from the airplane, but if you are down at eye level on your feet and going from one place to another, Brasilia is a disaster. Every distance is too wide. Things are not connected. You have to trample for endless miles and miles along completely straight paths. Nobody ever started to think about what would it be to be out in Brasilia between all these monuments.
It recalls conversations of the art versus the artist, or impact versus intent. What happens when a piece of art is put out into the world and it's meant to impact people in one way, but it has a completely different result than the artist intended? In other words, what happens when the design yields unintended results? Well, that's the human factor. That's the hardest part of design.
We are really talking about the urban habitat of Homo sapiens. It's the same Homo sapiens all over the world. We are the same little walking animal.
Understanding humans is fundamental to understanding good design. We are the most important piece of this puzzle. Design doesn't dictate us, we dictate design. This is sort of what plays out in the film's segment on Detroit. It's no secret Detroit is a contracting city, slowly reducing in population and scaling back its infrastructure. But in scaling back, what about the people who still live there? In Detroit, we meet a community that has been failed by design. What was once a thriving neighborhood is now dotted with abandoned lots. Where there were once stores and movie theaters, there is now dust. The people are struggling. So what do you do about it? Well, the city hasn't been much help to the actual human people living in these neighborhoods, but this is once again where we see the human equation factor in. Members of the community organize gardens on empty lots, growing free food for their neighbors. Others grow local produce to sell at commercial community markets.
I would almost use the term self-organized urbanism to describe what's going on there, in the sense that there is a kind of possibility, a sort of DIY aesthetic that does in fact exist in the city that is allowing for a lot of individual initiatives to happen. And you see that in the urban agricultural movement.
As Hustwit highlights DIY design, humans on the ground taking the reins from urban designers in ivory towers, it's no wonder he employs some of his most humanist techniques while doing so. Conducting interviews not in offices but on the ground, in the grass, amidst DIY work being done by a community that has been failed by design. The DIY qualities of Hustwit's dock come to life. No need for fancy lighting setups. We've got everything we need out on this lot, a lot reclaimed by humanity and by the natural world. This section also brings one of my favorite moments in this whole trilogy. I already shared it a moment ago. This long, silent shot going down the metro line in downtown Detroit. All that plays over it is music. It's probably the longest stretch of time in any of these films where we just sit and look at the design around us. And I love it because it's charmingly human. Looking out the window, taking the world in as a city full of design passes us by, as we approach our own little plot of humanity that lies within it. Between these scenes of failed design and DIY design, we also see example upon example of how when urban design is designed well and executed well, it can do great things for improving the human experience. This bike route that prioritizes those who can't afford cars above the traditional luxury experience of automobiles. These urban watchtowers and lit pathways that have drastically reduced violent crime in a South African community shunned by the local government. Formulas don't have to be broken. They don't have to be malicious. They may be designed to manipulate, but that manipulation can be used for great good just as much as it can be used for great evil. We don't have to be cold. We don't have to feel small. Design may harm us, but it can also liberate us. In large part, It just depends on who's in charge. As we've discussed throughout the course of this video, we can apply all of these dialogues about design to the media we consume. So, as we do on this channel, let's talk about cinema. Just like urban design, graphic design, industrial design, cinema too is designed. Cinema too is about manipulation. On the bad end of that stick, we can see this play out in propaganda films. In the same way those other forms of design can be used in the service of corporate or fascistic interests, so too can film. One look at the filmography of the infamous Nazi filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl reveals that much. What makes her films so searingly evil isn't just the fact of their subject matter, but the general quality of their design. These are well-made films that use basic cinematic and photographic design principles like the golden composition rules to very intentional effect. Just as graphic design and urban design and the design of everything was tailored in service of the Nazis' agenda, cinema was a part of that design. Yet, cinema can also accomplish great good. You can use the very same design principles to manipulate audiences into empathizing with marginalized communities, taking a stand in times of great civil strife, being kind to their neighbors. Cinema can spread many messages, big and small, and it all boils down to the same things we've been discussing for this entire video. Designers have a great responsibility to use the principles of design to do good for the world. For design can be exploited in many, many terrible ways, and filmmakers have the very same responsibility. But we can use our knowledge of design for good. We can scrap together DIY design plans, as so many independent filmmakers do, to use our designs for the good of our community. We must acknowledge corporate design interests, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that a good formula can have its variables swapped around to say something much more interesting and much more impactful than other blockbusters use that very same formula for. When we find new ways of successfully manipulating an audience, sticking with that design has the capacity to accomplish many things. Again, we just have to use it responsibly and with respect to humanity. Hustwit's trilogy is a reflection of this. A filmmaker fascinated with design created his own design for a good documentary, and he used his design not just to inform, but to express his humanity, and the humanity of everyone being manipulated by design on a daily basis. Design really is inescapable, but I do think there's something special about helping us all see the design of the world around us, how we can use it, fight it, change it. It helped me design this video, this thumbnail, this title, and I'd like to hope that even though every minute of this video has been designed to manipulate you in one way or another, maybe you got something out of this. I didn't design this to dupe you in any way. I just thought all of this was worth sharing and exploring so that we can all understand how to navigate the designs that surround us. Just remember, you have agency in this too. At the end of the day, no matter how much subliminal design manipulation is all around you, the way you respond can change everything. If you liked my design, consider liking and subscribing to let me know. Or if you think there are things I could improve, leave a comment, let's talk about it, wield your power. And if you want more content, check out my channel for more video essays exploring every corner of cinema, past and present. If Hustwit's goal was to document the world of design, mine is to document the world of film. I'd love for you to become a part of supporting that mission.